Thank you for joining our discussion on diversity in pediatric surgery and on the importance of pathway development and programs. My name is Kiana Williams. I'm a research fellow at the University of Michigan, and I'll be co-moderating with
Jennifer Murphy, I'm a surgeon in New Jersey.
Let me get started. Okay, so the title is no two paths are the same, a discussion on the importance of pathway development in pediatric surgery. Okay. There we go, no disclosures. So first we would like to define the term pathway and why it's the preferred term that's used today. While the term pipeline is still widely used to describe mechanism to increase diversity, there's been a recent change to using the term pathway instead. The term pipeline can be viewed as offensive due to a recent and historical environmental degradation involving pipeline projects that disrupt sacred homelands in Native communities and other marginalized communities. In Indigenous American and Native communities, pipeline is a literal term that reflects struggles with oil industries and threats to communities, highlighting divestment and displacement communities. There's also the phenomenon of school-to-prison pipeline that refers to the policies and practices that push school children, particularly marginalized and most at-risk children, out of the classroom and into the criminal justice system. Given that negative association, educators have worked to try to separate from that term as well. But additionally, pathway is a much more comprehensive metaphor that encompasses all the aspects and all the things that goes into reaching a goal and whatever goal that may be. So this talk led us to think about how pathways were first developed and how they became a tool for increasing diversity. And we must keep in mind that segregation, racism, and bias has been woven into medical education since its inception. And this has created disparities in care for decades. However, sparked by a combination of civil rights activism and physician shortage, the AAMC and various congressional acts moved to increase the number of underrepresented minorities within healthcare via something called academic enrichment programs. Data showed that at that time, enrollment increased from 3% in 1968 to 10% in 1974. However, diversity within the general population increased at a much faster rate than what medical providers could provide. So while there's been an effort to narrow the gap has actually widened even more. In 1990, AAMC adopted the term pipeline with the goal to get what they said 3,000 by 2,000. However, almost expectedly, it was met with a nationwide resistance to affirmative action at that time. But fortunately, efforts continued and pathway programs trickled down to universities, medical schools, and grade schools, sparking various programs at local, state, and federal level. We believe that diversity remains an integral component to delivering excellent health care, and that physician workers should reflect the general population. This graph, taken from the US Census, highlights that the nation's population is becoming increasingly diverse, and more relevant to our specialty, children are even more diverse. Studies have shown that underrepresented minorities are more likely to work within underserved population. Additionally, there is an increasing body of data showing that provider-concordant care improves outcomes. Unfortunately, demographic data shows that the composition of our surgical workforce still does not reflect that of the general population. This is not only regarding racial diversity, but also ethnic background, gender identity, and sexual orientation. At a more granular level, we must consider intersectionality and how that plays a role within larger groups. APSA, in conjunction with the DEI leadership and program directors, employed a pathway specific to pediatric surgery. The program APGAR was developed recently to address pathway development within the specialty and provide a novel and feasible mechanism to engage underrepresented minorities and pediatric surgeons. But I won't spend too much time on that, and we'll let our panelists kind of discuss that. And with that being said, I would like to introduce our panel, starting first with Dr. Marjorie Archer. She is the Chief of Pediatric Surgery from the University of Rochester. Dr. Lauren Berman, our Program Director from Nemours Children's Health in Delaware Valley. Dr. Sean McLean, Division Chief of Pediatric Surgery at the University of North Carolina. And Dr. Newman, the Section Chief of Pediatric Surgery at the University of Michigan. Thank you, and welcome to our panelists. So to start the discussion, To start the discussion, I will direct my question to Dr. McLean. If you could give us your personal experience with pathway programs and give us a discussion about how different allies along that pathway have helped you.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you all for attending the program today. This obviously is a very important topic for our field, for our patients, and for our nation. And I would argue that, I'm not making the argument. I mean, it's a fact that, diversity programs are presently under attack. I live in the state of North Carolina, where the Board of Trustees and the Board of Governors have, made a decision to eliminate all diversity programs at the University of North Carolina. So that's my place of work. And it's interesting, they started with the flagship university for the university system. And I'm sure that, in the coming weeks, this will spread to the entire university system, and then they'll probably try to make stipulations for other, institutions within the state. So, where we live, diversity programs are actively under attack, and I'm sure in other parts of the country that there are maneuvers, whether they're overt or behind the scenes, to, as one of our state legislators said, make us look like Florida. And when that statement was made, I said to a colleague, who's the us? Because I don't want to look like anything like Florida when it comes to, education and to access to education. And so the key thing that we have to, understand about pathway programs is, first of all, why do we have them? And it starts with something that actually happened 70 years ago. Does anybody know what's special about today's date? So today is the 70th anniversary of the decision for Brown versus Board of Education. And so that is, the start of, the desegregation or the mandatory desegregation of schools based upon a decision in federal courts. And, the legacy goes on from there. So, if you want to, we talked about, alibis, if you want to, engage kind of in this struggle or in this fight to continue to, allow access for all to higher education, then you have to ask yourself a couple things. Number one, why are you doing it? And from a medical standpoint, we're doing it because there is an overabundance of data that shows that a diverse workforce is best for all of our patients. I mean, it's been proven, many decades ago. There are plenty of studies that show it now. So it's important to understand that that's got to be a bedrock of any argument that you make. And then the next question you need to ask yourself is, if you look around at the local university or local college in your own community, does it look anything like your community? So from a racial and ethnic standpoint, I know in North Carolina, our entering freshman class looks nothing like the state of North Carolina. The state of North Carolina is 25%, African American to start off. I mean, I could go down on other stats, but we don't have a 25% presence of African American students in the freshman class coming into the University of North Carolina. And if you take away our football team, it gets even worse. Dean Smith never had any problems recruiting black athletes for basketball, but we seem to have a problem with, allowing for, access for African American students in a proportion that reflects what our state looks like at the flagship, institution for our state. And so, if we can't have access that looks like our local communities, our state, or even our country at the college level, then we're not going to have it at the medical school level, and then our field is definitely not going to have any reflection of what our local communities look like in terms of representation, based upon race and ethnicity. And so then the next question you need to ask yourself is K through 12 education equitable across the board? You can look at your own community. You can look at nearby communities. You can look across your state. You can look across the country. You know, we have people that are banning books in certain communities, which when I was growing up, people asked you to read books and go to the library and get as many books as you could, but now they want you to get rid of certain books. But, you know, beside all the nonsense, I mean, you need to really ask yourself that question. You know, so, and the answer obviously is that, you know, it's not equitable. We don't have standards. We don't have standards about, you know, scientific and mathematic education, which obviously is crucial to our field. And so, you know, obviously based upon that, there are going to be kids that are not prepared to then have access, again, from a competitive standpoint, to getting into, you know, colleges that will then allow them to move forward into medicine and surgery. And so at the end of the day, you know, it all starts back at the beginning of that, you know, pipeline or pathway. And since we're not going to use the term pipeline, pathway. So the origin of pathway or pipeline programs, as they called it in the late 60s, were the Health Care Opportunity Programs Act, which basically that allotted money for there to be basically programs created to increase diversity in the workforce specific to healthcare. And so that goes back, I believe, to the late 60s. I don't remember the exact date. And out of that, there were a few programs that were born. The first that I know of, and I think it's actually the first, was at the Medical College of Georgia, where there was a summer enrichment program that was created to increase the numbers, specifically African-American students at the time, to go into medicine and dentistry. And that was, I think it was 69 or 70. And then another program, the deans changed, so the dean that was at Medical College of Georgia was actually Christopher Fordham. He was actually a Tar Heel, ended up at Medical College of Georgia. Tar Heel, meaning he was from UNC for most of his career, went to Medical College of Georgia to become dean, and then he came back to UNC, and then he started a similar program in 1974, and so we're actually celebrating the 50th year, and that's the Medical Education Development Program, which is a summer enrichment program to, again, initially for African-American students, but then the mission spread to students from rural backgrounds, disadvantaged students, non-traditional students, obviously students from other racial and ethnic groups that were underrepresented. But it's a program that was one of the HCOP programs that started in the early 70s. And there were many programs like that. There was a a large group of programs that were started, but many of them over, the course of political change, what have you, they lost funding and they don't exist. The program at UNC does still exist. But the point is that, those programs actually were successful. They were successful at developing students and preparing them for entrance into most of them into medical school, a lot of them into dental school, and other health professions. And so just to come to a close, if you want to be an ally, if you're in the fight, know that these programs are going to disappear because the funding is disappearing. And they have been successful at changing the workforce. And we need those pathway programs if we want to be able to change the workforce so it looks like what America looks like, and it can have the greatest impact upon our patients.
Thank you. So Dr. Arca, at what point along the pathway do you think we should intervene, or at what point do you think it's most effective to engage trainees?
I think one should intervene as early as possible, for whatever that means. As Dr. McLean had said, the earliest education needs to be standardized, but unfortunately, that's not within our lane. You know, we're physicians, we get up in the morning, we try to make children better in a different realm. However, there are a lot of things that we can do to try to support the engagement of underrepresented minorities as early as we can. So APGAR, which is one of the innovative ways that we're trying to get trainees and students to know about pediatric surgery, to have support within pediatric surgery when they live in environments that don't even have pediatric surgery within their realm of thought, is one of the things that we really like to support. So think about a child or an adolescent who is in a high school, who is trying to get good grades and make ends meet, and not really doing great in, you know, the class that they've been in, but to give them some hope and give them some support. APGAR is really innovative and neat because we are able to get people from all over the country and the world, actually, to come join us in a Zoom meeting and say, okay, I need help with my personal statement. I need help with putting my CV together for whatever that means. That's one way of doing it. In Rochester, actually, Rochester, New York, which, by the way, is home to Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, for those who you didn't know. We have recently, as a department, became really acutely aware of our history and our history of redlining and systemic racism and poverty that has gone in cycles. And it's clear that the fruits of those practices continue to be with us in the same neighborhood where there's that poverty is the same neighborhood where we have premature infants who need our G-tubes, who also who have developmental delays and need access, so their health care is not great. It's very interesting nowadays because when 2020 happened and George Floyd happened and there was such a hue and cry from everywhere regarding justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and everyone just felt that was the right thing to do. This pendulum is actually swinging the other way, and it's concerning and scary, but I think we need to be very steadfast in knowing what we know to be right, which is we need to have people represented in all aspects of medicine because that makes it better for everyone concerned. Has anyone heard of a musical called Hamilton? All right, it's just a little thing, you know. One of the things that has actually resonated with me is history has its eyes on you. It's one of the songs that's there. And however it is, and we always feel the impact, even at the level of APSA and the level of the American College of Surgeons, where people say, you know, if you have a DEI program, I'm not going to be a member. I'm not going to be a fellow anymore. I'm not going to be an APSA member anymore. You just do the right thing, just like you do every single day. It's hard and it's you know, painful, but it's the right thing to do. And you continue to be supportive. You continue to support that medical student that you know is having a hard time because they're having a hard time, and you teach them and you allow them. You accept another shadowing opportunity from the fourth college student or high school student because you know that having you as even just part of their mentor would be helpful for them. So I think you can't start too early, and you can't stop. with letters of promotion, letters of recommendation, so that everyone will continue to succeed in the paths that they've chosen.
Any other response from our panelists for this question? So kind of building on that, we're talking about the backlash and the pendulum swinging. Dr. Newman, what are some of the objections or criticisms that you've experienced about pathways, and how did you respond to those, or what are some of the things that people can do to kind of gain institutional support?
Yeah, I think, these programs such as these are not, they're not traditionally in sort of our lane. I've been told that, we are here to practice surgery, practice medicine, and somehow the social problems and the issue of workforce diversity is in a different lane than ours. I think a lot of it has to, and I used to kind of not know how to take those kinds of comments, but I understand a lot more about how departmental medical school administrators think, and a lot of it does have to do with cost. And so who's paying, and remember, time is our most precious resource, so who's devoting their time to going to an elementary school and getting kids excited about medicine and surgery, right? Well, if you're doing that, is that taking away from your academic time somehow? Or is that taking away from your clinical productivity somehow? And so time, which is our most precious resource, resources, oftentimes schools and young people that we're trying to get excited need transportation to even get into our, come to clinic and shadow us, or come for a lecture or a didactic session. Well, what about resources for transportation and for food while they're there? Who's paying for that? And so I think costs, I think time are big barriers, definitely can be overcome. I think another criticism is probably in one of, I'm pretty critical about pathway programs, is that we oftentimes stop short of guaranteeing. I think we should be figuring out ways to guarantee success. And that means it's not enough to, have students come and, we do a lot of things that are feel good, right? And I'm really critical of myself included in our institutions, where we bring students and we have them do things on our campus, and then they go away and we never know what happened to them. Are they, they've spent a year in our program. Did they get into college? Did they get into medical school? Are they now in residencies? Are they struggling? How can we be more helpful in sort of insulating this pathway that we speak about? Because that part, I think, is really, it's very passive, most pathway programs, where, yes, we provide shadowing opportunities, we can, we mentor and we give advice as best as we can, but how are we really guaranteeing success as a whole? I'll give you an example. Our program, the Doctors of Tomorrow at Michigan, I'll put us on the spot, because we started this program about 9 years ago. I think they're going into their 10th year. And from the original Doctors of Tomorrow program, this is a surgery program, so I'm putting myself, critical of myself as well. It was started by one of our adult MIS surgeons, and we all rallied and we were excited. We were going to Cass Tech High School in Detroit. We would go there and give talks, and we'd bring the kids to Ann Arbor on Saturdays, and they would participate in simulation and shadowing. And these kids are and have been in our systems. The first class, out of the first class of 25 or so kids, about 8 of them matriculated through the University of Michigan. So that's exciting, right? Now, I will say Cass Tech is an outstanding, I don't know if you guys know about Cass Tech High School, it's an outstanding high school. So many of those kids were going to college anyway. But 8 matriculated through undergrad, and 2 years ago we realized that of the 8, there were 5 that were still on the pre-medical track. Those kids were struggling. Not one of them had applied or gotten accepted to medical school. So are we really creating the doctors of tomorrow? And so we began to push that we create process and programs that would, because these are kids that have been with us since they were 9th graders. And now they've graduated from undergrad, and they're still not applying. They take the MCAT, the scores are not high enough, and they're still not ready to apply to medical school. So finally, I'm so excited to say that Rico is, he doesn't mind not share his name because he speaks on our behalf as well. He was an original Cass Tech student, was interviewed and accepted into a pathway program at Michigan State. He finished that just this June. He's gonna work with us in our lab this summer. Then he got accepted to Michigan State for medical school. So he's the first one. But listen, it's cool, right? But the issue is that he's the only one. He's the only doctor of tomorrow. Of those 25 kids, then 8 that matriculated to undergrad, and now he will, this fall, matriculate into medical school. So we'll take it, right? But think about the impact we could have if we had, 25 kids that were from their freshman year in high school. Now all of them are entering medical school. Like, that's when you really start to shift the atmosphere with programs like these. So there's something that's missing that this generation will help us figure out. There's something that's missing with these pathway programs, even in the most, Michigan, we have great programs and great environment. There's something missing still.
Would anybody else like to add?
Just to echo on what Dr. Newman was saying, just with the pathway program, so you have to stay engaged. It has to start early. But the key thing is you got to have a way to track and support the kids all the way through the process. So, we essentially, initially, was kind of cobbled together, but over time, at the University of North Carolina, we essentially have programs at every stage, starting at the elementary school phase, middle school, high school. Then when they get into college, the students that are at UNC, we have, it's kind of a peer group that has undergraduate students. There's a minority men in medicine, minority women in medicine group, but also there are folks that help to mentor the students that participate that are at multiple levels, ranging from people in the dean's office, attendings, faculty members, residents that even go to some of their sessions, medical students, and then the undergraduates at different levels. And then the key thing is to get them to the stage where they can get to our summer enrichment program, which is a program I spoke of that's been around since '74. And in that program, it's an intense time where they have an opportunity to, basically experience have a simulation of the coursework that they may see in medical school over an 8-week period in the summertime. And there's also MCAT prep and other things associated with that. And then from that, the support continues until they get through the process and essentially get into medical school or dental school if they're in the dental side of the program. And there are folks that go into other health professions, but over time, the MED program has had over 1,200 physicians that have come out of the program, about 300 plus dentists, and I was a part of the program. We have faculty members, many faculty members in medical school, you know, people out in practice. I mean, so it's, you know, but the key thing is that, you know, once you're in the program works hard to stay engaged and to help to facilitate, you know, or to make sure that you have all the tools to get into medical school. And then there's support mechanisms that the folks that actually run the program that are in place while, if you're a student at UNC, they also have some, you know, support mechanisms there for the students that went through that pathway process.
So Dr. Berman, many of us here are involved with the residency and fellowship programs. What do you think we can do to increase diversity?
Thanks for the question. I have to really say I'm honored to be sitting here next to Erica because she's really inspired me to think about how can we really take some tangible lessons. You know, when we talk about this, it feels so overwhelming, and like, what can any one of us actually do to make an impact? And I just want to emphasize the problem starts way, way before, you know, we're even dealing with application to residency and especially fellowship. But I think, you know, we really want to make sure that for the people who are able to get to that point, we're giving them a fair shot. And my memory is so clear of, I think it was back in like 2018 or something, I was the vice chair of the Quality and Safety Committee, and I think Erica was chair of the DEI Committee of APSA, and we were at a meeting of the chairs and the board of governors. We all got to meet, I think it was in Florida somewhere. And I just remember her standing up and talking about what they had done at Michigan to help level the playing field and give everyone an equal chance as we approach our fellow selection process. And one thing that has been such a critical part of our match is the phone calls. We interview, we are deciding our rank list, and we decide like who's gonna call who about this candidate to figure out like where we should put them on the list. And that practice in and of itself, you are guaranteed to continue to populate your fellowship with people who are just like you. And we know most of pediatric surgery is not very diverse. So at Michigan, they made the bold move of, we're not doing the phone calls this year. And there were a lot of other things she described, but that one really stuck with me. And I think it was in January. I had just become program director at Nemours, and I brought it back to my group, where very white, very male group. And people were like, wait, what? We're not going to do phone calls? And then I said, well, that's what they did at Michigan. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess we don't have to do it if they don't have to do it. And that was just like the first little step into starting to change our process and have everybody really acknowledge that we need to change the process to make things different. And then another kind of moment for me was when Ben Nwome was the chair of the APS-TPD, the Association for Pediatric Surgery Training Program Directors, and we have a 3-hour meeting with every APSA meeting, and again in the fall, and it's packed with like really important agenda items like, you know, the RRC update and what changes are they making to the case log requirements, and so it's a very captive audience for 3 hours. And Ben made the decision that he was going to use the entire agenda to do diversity training for all the program directors. Because all the people in this room, you already know that this is important, and you're here because you have that awareness, and it's the people who aren't in this room who really need to be here listening to this. So by sort of repurposing the meeting, all those people were in the room. And it was incredibly powerful just to see the revelations that were happening when we did this diversity training. So that made me want to take that back to my program. So I just wanted to kind of give a few concrete steps that everyone can do. If you are a faculty member, a training program director, even many of you who might be lab residents, who might go back and become administrative chief residents, or residents who have a role in your training program's interview process. So, I mean, I think it starts with, how do you advertise your program? If you want to attract diverse applicants, you want to make sure that your mission statement and your values and goals that are listed on your website include that you value diversity and equity. That should come across strong. If all the pictures on your website don't contain any diversity, that sends a strong message. And then I think a big next step is preparing your team, having the conversation about every interview season. I send an email out to everyone on our faculty who participates in the interview process, from the schedulers to our APP staff to the faculty. And we did a diversity training we have an Office of Health Equity and Inclusion. If you don't have that, there are some videos available online, and I can give some of those resources. But every single person who's participating in the process is not voluntary, or those of you who think it's important, they all participate in this training. And part of it, I think, is to do an implicit association test so everybody becomes aware of their biases and knows that they exist, rather than saying, I don't have any bias, And then once you're aware of it, the training can teach some of the mitigation strategies, so that can help level the playing field for the applicants. When it comes to deciding who you're going to interview, it's really important to have a diverse team of people. And now especially many pediatric surgery divisions, there's not a lot of diversity, so you can go outside of your division to help screen the applications. And I suggest starting with a personal statement. I think especially pediatric surgery is very traditionally kind of pedigree focused, and I think when you start with a personal statement, you're not making any judgments based on where this person went to college or where they're doing their residency, and you get to know who they are as a person, and thinking about things like distance traveled and what their attributes are that you're really looking for, as opposed to what's on their CV. The AAMC has great resources that describe this holistic approach to the application, the interview process. So those are really great resources to use. Then when it comes to the interviews, I think it's really critical to have standardized interview questions. I assign my faculty each 2 questions that they have to ask. They're behavioral questions. They're more focused on describing a life experience, as opposed to where do you want to be in 5 years, which I don't think are as informative. And just asking everyone the same questions, again, levels the playing field. If we don't do that, we end up having these great connections and kind of small talk with the people who are more like us, and we're more likely to keep matching people that are like us, who are not likely to be diverse. And I think that also sends a message to the applicants when you set up your interview that day, an interview day that way, that this is important to us as a program. Because you're centering it around this concept. And I'm open with the applicants. I tell them it might feel a little awkward because you're going to be asked these behavioral questions, and they're very standardized, and it might not flow like a normal small talk type interview, but it sort of gives them that context and understanding. I mentioned the no phone calls thing, so that's kind of the next step when you're making your rank list. And then, different programs have different approaches to how they might score to rank, but really assigning a value to the concept of, distance traveled, and thinking about the candidates that had maybe more hardships to overcome, and kind of giving them credit for that, as opposed to just looking again at what their pedigree looks like. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is, how do we, just because you match into residency or fellowship doesn't mean you're going to succeed. There are alarming statistics about the involuntary attrition rate for Black surgery residents. It's much, much higher than white surgery residents. So when you're in a role of a faculty or program director where you might be processing, handling complaints or, professionalism concerns, just seeing it through that lens of I remember I had a very big awakening when I was talking with a trainee and trying to share some feedback about an interaction with a nurse, and I tried to identify with her about it and say, I understand, as a woman, it can be really hard because nurses are going to treat you differently. And she's like, no, you don't understand because you're white. And I was so happy that she had the courage to say that to me. And it was just a huge eye-opening moment. And when I'm processing these complaints or concerns, I see it through a very different lens. And I think it's just so important to think about how to support a diverse applicant once they succeed in the match, and making sure you get them through to the end of it. So those are sort of the things that I've learned over the years from really incredible mentors like Dr. Newman here, Dr. Norme, and hopefully can package some of that and take it home with you and start to chip away at what feels like an insurmountable problem.
So we'd like to open up the floor to questions if anybody has any.
Do you think there's a role in some of these programs that engage younger students to help maybe show them a broader array? Like, because you're saying 1 out of 20 got to the MD stage, but a broader array of different healthcare professions that maybe they don't necessarily have exposure to. Because how do you take a 5th grader and say that person is going to have the academic ability to succeed? Like, how do you identify the one that, like in a class of 5th graders, that's going to make it? Like, if, I don't know, you look at my university, my first year university class, life sciences, 400 people, 300 of them wanted to be doctors, right? 300 of them did not end up being doctors. And that's like people that have gotten to that stage. So do you think there's any role for pathway programs to help expose alternate pathways or alternate careers to get people to places of success that also need diversity? Or do you think that we can really identify people that young that have that potential to become physicians?
I'll take that question because we have something relatively, well, I think it's innovative, but you guys probably may have something very similar. In Rochester, the Department of Surgery has now a vice chair of diversity and inclusion, and she's just an amazing person, Paula Cupertino. And for some reason, she was able to get Blue Cross Blue Shield to help us with summer scholars, and they're in the high school range. And instead of saying, you are going to med school, you are going to be a surgeon or whatever, it is that exposure to something that they've never seen. And some of them fell in love with plastic surgery. Some of them want to be an ICU nurse because those are the exposures that they've seen. I will tell you that when I graduated medical school, I did not know what a radiation oncologist was. And one of my friends, matched into radiation oncology. I'm like, oh, for God's sakes, I could have been that, I just didn't know that those things existed. And a lot of our children do not know that all these things exist. So just like your own children, figure out what they want. And they may not want to be. I mean, my 2 kids, they're like, no, Mom, I'm not going to be a doctor. Similar to these kids as well. But the ability to at least make them aware that there are these careers that are available to them, and be able to support that at any stage, whatever it means. And also, the support can be something also of an awareness of where they are. And making sure, like your residents, texting them and saying, hey, you okay? How's internship coming along? Wherever there may be. I think that would help.
I just want to start by thanking the panel. This is a very special event, and I look at the board and I see 3 people who trained me along the way: Dr. Arca, Dr. Adams-Newman, Dr. McLean, and then Dr. Berman, who I was introduced to by my division chief in your work with wellness. So it's a great group that's up there. And by the way, Dan Saltzman really supports this effort as well. So I just want to make a comment, then I'll ask you a question. I think that as I listen to what you're saying, especially Erica, your comments about making it organic and grassroots, Minneapolis was in the center of the storm a few years ago with George Floyd. And so as a consequence of that, the residents got together and they started our DI effort. And our chairman came to me and asked to help. But it's been slow. We've grown it. We've worked with Tuskegee University for the past 3 years. We brought students up in college to work with us, and we've developed a pretty comprehensive program. And we're very proud of that. We actually turned it into an NIH grant. So this year it's been funded, which is pretty cool. But we have opportunities. Erica, to your point, none of those students were invited for an applicant interview for our medical school. So we're trying to intentionally go back and say, how can we really target that? Because we had an education curriculum, how to take the MCAT, how to write a letter, and they still didn't get in. So you want to be thoughtful, I think, about the process, but I think those are real opportunities. I guess my question for the group, one thing that we encountered that I did not anticipate, but maybe I should have, because I sort of felt the same way, and my chair came to me, there's a little bit of apprehension, especially amongst the residents. Less so with faculty, but the residents, especially those of color, I found are reluctant to get involved, and some of that might be fatigue. They're tapped out. Others have just some real apprehension about what it might look like to be under the microscope. Have you encountered that personally? Can you comment on that, give some advice to us? How should the residents move forward? Should they stay engaged or should they stay in the background because they might be afraid of reprisals?
I know it looks like we're short on time a little bit, but I can, I think that there's this phenomenon called minority tax. I think that is a real concern in that sometimes we rely quite heavily on residents and faculty of color to participate in our Pathway Pipeline programs, to mentor, to show up. And I think that there definitely is some fatigue, particularly post George Floyd and COVID. I mean, our residents have just said, we're tired. Like they're just tired of even talking about it. We have this, it's like an M&M, it's called cultural complications. And even now we can tell that depending on the topic of whatever is being discussed at the cultural complication, the residents more so than anyone else are just super sensitive, and they're just super critical of the speakers, because their exact words were, we're tired of teaching about anti-racism. Like, people need to do the work on their own and study and get, allies. Allyship is important, and not having the sense that the people of color need to be always the ones that are leading these programs and that are doing the mentorship, because that minority tax is real.
Just a quick comment. Well, not a quick comment, maybe. But one thing for you to think about your program, did you all write a summation letter for each student? You don't have to answer that, but we can talk about it offline. Just in terms of whether or not they should show up, I mean, my opinion is yes, they need to show up. I mean, someone showed up before they did. Someone probably opened the doors for them in Minnesota and elsewhere. Even if they just show up to participate in a social event or, just something small, just the sheer presence of the residents or students from underrepresented backgrounds, it shows your summer program student, I assume it's a summer program, your students from Tuskegee, that it's possible. They need to know that it's possible to get there. And if they don't see tangible examples, people that don't have gray hair, that are closer to them in age, people that, may, I don't know, share some of the same interests in rap music. I don't like what my residents listen to, but, it's always a point of contention. But, that's a little joke, but in all seriousness, there needs to be a tangible example that can communicate, closer to their level, as opposed to, you find a faculty member that's 65 years old that, is coming and that, is supposed to connect with these younger students. And the connection may not happen. So, for any of these programs, whether it's for elementary students, middle school students, or what have you, tangible examples of someone that shows that it's possible for them to get there. That sometimes is one of the most important things, because that may be the spark that helps them to, hey, I need to study hard so I can be a doctor, or I can be a physical therapist, or I can be a nurse, or I can be a surgeon. They just need those examples in front of them that they can touch. I have a basketball program that I run, but I make a pointed, I make a point of finding I got basketball students that play college basketball, one that even coached in college. They're a part of the program because they can come in, they're closer in age, they are medical students that are they're in the lab or whatever, and they can connect with these 5th graders, these 6th graders, these 7th graders. Because what I found is, not only is the whole educational thing messed up, but when they get to the high school level, they don't even know how to start the process of, even applying for college because their schools don't prepare them for it. And so, irregardless of the basketball piece, if they can't, get into college, there's no way that they can get to where we are. And so, fortunately, now we have students that have gone through, and we have some people that are on the trajectory to go to medical school. One of the students that's a coach, he matched an ENT, and he'll be an intern next year. He wanted to be a pediatric surgeon, and then he flipped. But, so tangible examples.
I just was wondering, Morgan Richards from Boise, thank you so much for your talk today, and I really appreciate it. How do you objectively evaluate your pathway programs? Dr. Newman, when only one gets through, are you looking at were their scores not high enough, or their letters not strong enough, or their grades not acceptable, or was it sort of more intangible? Was it were they wearing the right suits? Were they talking to the right people, or something like that? Or was it really an issue of, on the other side, getting admission and getting the interviews and, something outside of your students' hands? So and then did you make any adjustments to the program based on what you evaluated?
So it's pretty much the same. Students of color struggle with science GPA and MCAT scores. And so we have really tried to double down on support for those two things and, getting them into Kaplan. I think that, again, this can go back to knowledge acquisition all the way back to 3rd grade when it comes to science GPA. So I think it's a matter of resources and leaning into support for test scores and standardized test-taking skill. But it always comes down to those two things.
And we are out of time.
Out of time.
So I'd like to thank our panelists for their time, and if we can just give them a round of applause.